The first time I saw an apex predator bow, it was not to a king, a warlord, or one of the armored champions our academy worshipped like living weapons. It bowed to Caleb Mercer, a soft-skinned human from a planet everyone in the room had laughed at 5 minutes earlier. I remember the sound first. Not the roar, not the alarm, the silence after it. 52 cadets stood behind reinforced glass, every one of us trained to face battlefield panic, and not a single one of us moved. The Varric stood in the center of the survival pit, 8 feet at the shoulder, black-plated hide rising and falling with each breath, its claws scraping shallow marks into a floor rated for shuttle impacts. Across from it stood Caleb Mercer in a faded gray academy jacket, one hand still holding the paper coffee cup he had walked in with, like this was a delayed morning lecture and not the most dangerous predator demonstration in the Orion training sector. At his feet, Coron Vex, our strongest cadet, was sitting stunned on the mat, blinking like his brain had just received information it was not built to process. No blood, no dramatic final strike, just humiliation, clean and complete. The kind that enters a room quietly and never leaves. The instructor had stopped shouting commands. The emergency shield team had stopped counting down. Even the Varric had stopped growling. That was the part that rewired my understanding of humans forever. The beast lowered its massive head until its snout hovered inches above Caleb's boots. Then it exhaled, slow and heavy, and folded its front legs beneath itself. A submission posture. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Every species in the gallery knew what it meant, because every species in that room had been taught the same lesson since childhood. Apex predators do not bow. They dominate. They challenge. They make the rest of the ecosystem organize itself around their hunger. Yet there it was, the nightmare of 3 colonies and 12 failed capture teams, lowering itself before a human male who stood barely 6 feet tall and looked, by galactic standards, offensively underdesigned. No horns, no armor, no venom sacs, no secondary limbs, just 2 tired eyes, a calm face, and that absurd little cup of coffee. Caleb looked down at the Varric, then at the frozen instructor, then at all of us behind the glass. He gave a small shrug, as if embarrassed by the attention. That tiny motion made Coron flinch. I hated myself for noticing. Minutes earlier, I had laughed with everyone else when Caleb asked which apex predator we were warning him about. Minutes earlier, I thought humans were prey animals with confidence problems. Minutes earlier, I believed Earth was just another unpleasant death world with good public relations. Then the Varric bowed, and Caleb Mercer said, almost apologetically, yeah, Earth had things like this. Ours were smaller, though. That was when I stopped calling humans fragile. 18 minutes before the pit went silent, Caleb Mercer walked into Survival Hall 7 carrying a paper coffee cup, a canvas duffel bag, and the expression of someone who had taken a wrong turn on the way to a community college gym. That was my first real look at him. Not the legend. Not the monster the Varric would later recognize. Just a human exchange trainee with wind-tossed brown hair, a faded gray academy jacket, and boots that squeaked faintly against the polished black floor. He was late by 12 minutes, which at the Galactic Survival Academy was not considered rude. It was considered suicidal. Instructor Rack turned all 4 of his eyes toward the entrance, and 26 cadets followed his gaze with the eager cruelty of students who had just been handed entertainment before breakfast. Caleb stopped under the archway, glanced at the rows of armored trainees, the ceiling-mounted shock barriers, the hazard lights, the observation glass, and finally the enormous warning sign that read live predator curriculum in progress. Then he took a sip of coffee. That was when Coron Vex laughed. Coron was the pride of the Calthari delegation, 7 feet of polished muscle and ceremonial confidence, with shoulder plates wide enough to block a hallway and a voice that made smaller species check their insurance documents. He had won the Academy grappling circuit 3 cycles in a row. He had never been corrected in public. He had also never met a human, which explained the fatal optimism in his smile. "Is that the Earth trainee?" he asked loudly. "I thought Deathworlders were supposed to look dangerous." The room broke open with laughter. I laughed too. I will admit that now because honesty is part of recovery. Caleb looked dangerous in the same way a tired delivery driver looked dangerous, which is to say not at all unless you owed him a signature. His species had no crest display, no threat colors, no visible defensive structures. His skin looked thin. His eyes looked calm. His hands were wrapped around a coffee cup instead of a weapon. Rack's jaw plates clicked once, the sound he made when deciding whether to discipline someone or let the lesson do it for him. "Cadet Mercer," he said, voice flat. "You are entering a restricted predator instruction chamber without armor." Caleb looked down at himself, then at the other cadets in their layered protective rigs. "I was told this was orientation." More laughter. Someone behind me whispered that humans probably classified vending machines as apex predators. Karan stepped closer, enjoying the size difference. "Orientation is for species that survive long enough to need directions." Caleb gave him a polite nod, the kind humans used when they heard something stupid but had been raised too well to say so. That annoyed Karan more than fear would have. Instructor Rack lifted a claw toward the far doors. "Today's lesson concerns recognition, distance, and respect. Behind that barrier is a Varrock, one of the most dominant land predators ever removed from a Class 9 biosphere. You will observe only. You will not approach. You will not provoke. You will not attempt dominance behavior." Caleb's face changed slightly at the word predator. Not fear. Interest. He looked toward the sealed doors the way my species looks toward a menu after a long shift. I should have noticed that. We all should have. Instead, Karan leaned down near Caleb's shoulder and said, "Try not to faint, little Earth male." Caleb smiled into his coffee. No promises. Instructor Rack did not waste breath on Caleb's smile. He turned, keyed his command band, and the main doors of Survival Hall 7 opened with a slow hydraulic groan that made every cadet stand straighter. Beyond them was the Hall of Teeth, though that was not its official name. Officially, it was the Comparative Predator Anatomy Gallery, a phrase so sterile it almost sounded educational instead of terrifying. The hall stretched nearly 200 feet, lit in cold white bands from the floor, with reinforced display cases lining both walls. Inside them were skull molds, claw casts, scale plates, thermal scans, bite force charts, and preserved training trophies from worlds most species only visited through documentaries with warning labels. Each station projected a predator profile in the air: height, weight, sprint speed, ambush range, pressure tolerance, preferred hunting pattern, and recommended minimum evacuation distance. The numbers were enough to make confident cadets quiet. A Meridian glasstalker that could turn invisible under moonlight. A Bracker ridgecat that could leap 30 feet from a resting position. A swamp leviathan from Juneau Marsh that hunted by vibration and could detect footsteps through 6 inches of stone. The class moved past them in careful silence, because predator education at the academy was half science and half religion. You respected the things that sat at the top of food chains. You lowered your voice. You kept your hands close. You did not laugh. Caleb Mercer, unfortunately, looked fascinated in the wrong direction. He was not studying the hazard ratings. He was not shrinking from the Fong diagrams. He was walking along the displays with his coffee in one hand and his head tilted slightly, the way someone at a state fair might inspect barbecue options and wonder which booth had the best sauce. I saw Instructor Rack notice it too. His upper eyes narrowed. Karan noticed and smirked, eager for another opening. "Careful, human," he said. "Those are not pets from your little blue garden." Caleb paused in front of a projected image of the Juneau Marsh Leviathan, read the habitat notes, and made a small, thoughtful sound. "Looks like something my uncle would insist tastes fine if you cook it long enough." Several cadets turned toward him at once. The translator did not hesitate. That made it worse. Rack stopped walking. "Cadet Mercer, are you suggesting your family consumed predator-class fauna?" Caleb blinked, as if the question itself was strange. "I am from Louisiana. We have opinions about what counts as food." Nobody knew what Louisiana was. Somehow that made it sound worse. A nervous ripple moved through the group, not quite laughter this time, more like confusion trying to find a safe exit. I remember thinking humans had a suicidal relationship with categories. Threat, meal, weather event, weekend activity. They seemed to place all of it in the same mental drawer labeled manageable. Then we reached the final enclosure, and every joke died before it could form. The Varrock display did not use a simple projection. It used a full-scale motion capture reconstruction, towering over us in black and amber light, shoulders higher than most shuttle doors, head low, eyes forward, body built with the ugly efficiency of something nature had not softened with mercy. The hazard panel beside it glowed red across 12 separate categories. Instructor Rack faced the class and spoke quietly, which was always more frightening than shouting. This is not a challenge animal. This is not a dominance partner. This is not a creature you impress. The Varric recognizes movement, hesitation, fear chemistry, and social weakness. If you are ever within 50 feet of a live specimen, you do not run. You do not posture. You wait for extraction. Caleb leaned a little closer to the display, reading the diet analysis. Karan folded his arms. Finally scared, Caleb took one last sip of coffee and frowned at the hologram. No, he said. I am trying to figure out which one this reminds me of. For 3 full seconds, no one understood what Caleb Mercer had just said. The Varric display towered above us, all armored muscle and cold predator geometry, while the humans stared at it like a man trying to remember the name of a restaurant from a road trip. Instructor Rack's mandibles parted slowly. You are trying to identify a resemblance? Caleb nodded. Yeah, the head is wrong, and the shoulders are too high, but the posture is familiar. Karan Vex made a sharp sound that passed for laughter in his species. The human thinks the Academy's most dangerous specimen reminds him of something. He turned toward the rest of us, spreading all 4 arms in theatrical disbelief. Maybe a household animal. Maybe one of those emotional support creatures humans carry because silence frightens them. A few cadets laughed. I almost did, but something in Caleb's face stopped me. He was not offended. That was the problem. Insults usually landed somewhere. They changed breathing, posture, scent chemistry, eye focus. Caleb gave Karan nothing. He only looked back at the Varric profile, then pointed with the rim of his coffee cup. What does it eat? Rack's voice became careful. Anything below its mass class and most things above it, if cornered. The Varric is not a scavenger. It is a territorial apex hunter with advanced pattern recognition and extreme confidence behavior. Right, Caleb said. Ambush predator? Primarily. Does it roll when something gets under the front shoulder? Rack went still. His lower hand stopped moving. Why would you ask that? Caleb shrugged. Because the front stance looks heavy. Big animals with heavy fronts usually hate losing balance there. That was the first moment the room stopped treating him like a joke and started treating him like a translation error that might explode. Instructor Rack stepped closer, blocking Caleb from the display as though the hologram needed protection. Cadet Mercer, this lesson is not an invitation to theorize contact methods. You will observe. You will respect distance. You will remember that Earth survival stories do not override Academy protocol. Caleb lifted both hands slightly, coffee and all. Understood. Karan leaned in again, unable to let the attention move away from himself. Listen carefully, soft skin. The Varric has ended trials for veteran hunters. It has broken containment simulations. It makes trained officers forget their own rank. If the instructor says respect distance, you respect distance. Caleb looked up at him. I heard him. Then why are you smiling? Karan asked. Caleb glanced back at the red hazard panel. Because where I come from, warning signs are usually attached to things somebody already tried to ride, cook, or race. The translator delivered every word with crisp Academy clarity. A silence spread through the Hall of Teeth so quickly that even the ventilation seemed embarrassed. Instructor Rack stared at Caleb as if the human had just confessed to arguing with gravity. Your people attempted to ride predator-class animals? Caleb made a small face. Attempted is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Someone behind me whispered, that cannot be real. Caleb turned slightly. My high school mascot was an alligator. None of us knew what an alligator was. The Academy database did. A tiny auxiliary screen beside the Varric display flickered, searched Earth records, and projected an image of a broad-headed reptile with a thick tail and too many teeth for a school symbol. Under classification, the system wrote semi-aquatic ambush predator. Under human cultural associations, it wrote sports teams, regional cuisine, tourist warnings. That was when Instructor Rack finally lost control of the room. Cadets began talking over one another. Karan's crest flared with irritation. Caleb looked mildly apologetic, like his planet had embarrassed him at a formal dinner. Then, from behind the sealed live containment wall, something heavy shifted. The floor carried the vibration up through our boots. One slow scrape. One deep breath. The real Varric had heard us. The vibration from the containment wall changed the room faster than any instructor's command could have. One moment, the cadets were laughing at Earth school mascots and human food habits. The next, every trained body in the Hall of Teeth remembered why the floor had yellow distance lines painted across it. Instructor Rack raised one hand, and the noise died. Behind the wall, the Varric moved again, slower this time, dragging its weight along the inner platform with a sound like a heavy crate sliding across concrete. Caleb Mercer turned his head toward the sealed barrier, not quickly, not fearfully, just with focused curiosity. That annoyed Karan Vex more than the laughter had. I saw it happen in his posture. His shoulders lifted, his crest spread, his lower hands closed into tight fists while his upper arms folded across his chest, trying to look calm and failing with impressive commitment. Karan had spent his entire life being the largest problem in every room. Caleb had entered 12 minutes late with coffee and somehow become the only thing anyone was watching. For a creature like Karan, that was not a social inconvenience. That was an emergency. Instructor, Karan said, voice ringing through the gallery. Permission to demonstrate proper predator-facing stance for the Earth trainee. Rack did not look amused. Denied. Karan smiled anyway. Then permission to correct his attitude before it gets him recycled into academy paperwork. A few cadets made nervous sounds, because Karan was trying to be funny and threatening at the same time. It was not his best combination. Caleb took another sip from his cup and looked at the warning line on the floor. My attitude is fine. Your attitude is ignorance wearing cheap fabric, Karan said. He stepped closer, towering over him by more than a foot. You think a few swamp animals from your little state make you qualified to speak about a Varric? Caleb looked up at him. No. I think panic makes people worse at learning. That landed harder than an insult. Karan's smile vanished. Instructor Rack's eyes narrowed, but he did not interrupt. Perhaps he wanted to see whether the human would finally show fear. Perhaps he wanted Karan to embarrass himself quietly. None of us guessed the correct answer, which was that Caleb had already measured the room, the exits, the instructor's patience, Karan's balance, and probably the remaining warmth of his coffee. Karan reached out and pressed 2 fingers against Caleb's shoulder, a dominance gesture among his people, not quite an attack, but close enough to make the entire class lean forward. Caleb moved only half a step. Somehow that was enough. Karan's wrist angle changed. His weight shifted too far forward, and for one ridiculous second our strongest cadet had to catch himself to avoid stumbling into a display case labeled "Do Not Touch." Caleb did not smile. That made it worse. Careful, he said quietly. Floor is slick. The gallery went silent in a completely new way. Karan's face darkened with public humiliation. Put him in the observation pit, he snapped. Let him stand behind the inner line if he understands predators so well. Rack's answer came sharp. This is not a trial. Karan pointed at Caleb without looking away. Then make it a controlled confidence exercise. No contact. No release. Just proximity. Unless the human would prefer to admit he was joking. Every eye turned to Caleb. There it was, the trap. Refuse, and humans became cowards with strange cuisine. Accept, and he stood closer to a live Varric than any first-day cadet in academy history. Caleb looked at the containment door, then at Karan, then at his coffee. He sighed like a man being asked to help move a couch. Fine, he said, but if this becomes paperwork, I am spelling your name wrong. The observation pit was not a cage in the ordinary sense. It was a sunken training arena 70 feet across, surrounded by transparent shield glass, with pressure sensors under the floor and emergency anchors built into the walls. The academy called it a controlled learning environment, which was the sort of phrase institutions used when they wanted danger to sound like a budget item. Instructor Rack entered the command code with visible reluctance, and a narrow walkway extended from our side of the gallery into the pit. Caleb Mercer stepped onto it before anyone could reconsider. He still carried his coffee. I cannot stress that enough. Every cadet in that room had trained for years to treat predator exposure like a sacred ritual of survival, and the human walked forward like someone heading to a backyard cookout where the grill was taking too long to heat. Karan watched from beside the instructor, arms crossed, satisfaction returning to his face. He believed Caleb had accepted the challenge because human pride was louder than human intelligence. I believed that too. Most of us did. Caleb reached the center marker, looked down at the painted yellow circle, and stopped exactly where Rack told him to stop. That detail mattered later. He was casual, not careless. Calm, not stupid. There is a difference, and the galaxy has paid dearly for learning it late. Rack's voice came through the overhead speakers. Cadet Mercer, you will remain inside the marked zone. You will not approach the inner barrier. You will not make sudden movements. You will not attempt vocal contact. If I order you to retreat, you will retreat immediately. Caleb looked up at the glass. Yes, sir. His tone was so normal that it almost sounded disrespectful. Not because he meant it that way, but because everyone else in the room was breathing like the air had become expensive. The far wall of the pit began to open. Not all the way. Just enough for the inner containment field to shimmer into view, blue-white and humming. Beyond it, shadows shifted. Something large moved behind layered security glass. The Varric did not appear at first. It let us feel its presence before showing itself, which was somehow worse. A scrape against the floor. A low breath. The soft click of claws touching metal. Then its head emerged from the gloom behind the field, and half the class stepped back despite being protected by 3 separate shield systems. The animal was larger in person than the reconstruction had promised, because scale is a lie until it is standing across from you. 8 feet high at the shoulder. Nearly 2,000 pounds of controlled pressure. Eyes fixed forward, unblinking, patient. It studied the room through the glass, ignored the cadets, ignored Quran, ignored even Instructor Rack. Then it looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back. He did not raise his hands. He did not lower his gaze. He did not smile. He simply stood there, coffee cup resting at his side, his weight balanced over both feet. The Varric inhaled. The sensors caught the breath and displayed a red chemical analysis across the wall. Human scent profile detected. Unclassified response. Rack leaned toward the console. Unclassified. Quran's smile thinned. The inner field dropped from full opacity to observation transparency, and the Varric stepped forward until only the energy barrier separated it from Caleb by 15 feet. Any sane creature would have retreated inside its own skeleton. Caleb tilted his head slightly and whispered, not to us, not to the instructor, but to himself. Well, hey there. The Varric froze. Its ears shifted forward. Its shoulders lowered by 1 inch. 1 tiny inch. Yet every predator specialist cadet in the room felt the meaning hit like a door locking behind us. The beast was not preparing to chase. It was listening. Then Caleb Mercer did the first thing no trained cadet would have done. He crouched. Not fast. Not dramatic. He simply lowered himself until his eyes were no longer above the Varrics, and every predator specialist in the gallery made the same quiet sound of professional despair. Standing tall meant confidence. Turning away meant weakness. Crouching meant invitation, or so we had been taught. It reduced size. It exposed balance. It put the face closer to the problem, and the problem had teeth longer than my fingers. Instructor Rack snapped forward over the console. Cadet Mercer, stand up. Caleb did not. Easy, he said softly. The translator barely caught it. The Varric's head tilted, following the tone more than the word. Its breathing changed. The red analysis panel flickered again, then produced a new warning none of us had ever seen before. Behavioral model uncertain. Rack stared at it. That is impossible. Quran gave a harsh laugh, but it came out too loud and too thin. The animal is confused because the human smells like breakfast. Caleb lifted 1 hand, palm open, fingers relaxed. Not reaching, not challenging, just present. The Varric stepped closer to the barrier, shoulders rolling under its plated hide. 15 feet became 12. 12 became 10. The energy field hummed brighter, and Caleb finally rose, slow as sunrise. He set his coffee cup on the floor behind him without looking away. That, more than anything, frightened me. He was not preparing to run. He was freeing his hands. Rack's upper hands flew across the console. Reinforced containment. The system answered with a flat denial tone. Proximity calibration in progress. Do not interrupt. Academy equipment had many admirable qualities. Humility was not one of them. The field thinned for the scheduled sensor sweep. A 2-second transparency window designed for scanning, not contact. 2 seconds is nothing in a classroom. 2 seconds is everything to an apex predator. The Varric moved. I will not call it an attack, because that word suggests anger. This was a test. A flash of weight and instinct. A living storm crossing open ground to discover whether the creature in front of it was obstacle, rival, or food. The gallery shouted as one. Caleb did not shout. He moved sideways and down, turning his body at an angle so narrow I almost missed it. The Varric's front shoulder passed where his chest had been. Caleb's left hand touched the ridge behind its forelimb. His right hand caught the loose fold near the neck, and then his whole body became leverage. Not strength the way Karan understood strength. Not pushing. Not wrestling against mass. He borrowed the Varric's own motion and redirected it 6 inches. 6 inches was enough. The beast's front foot crossed its center line. Its weight shifted. Its huge body dipped, slid, and settled against the mat with a heavy thud that shook dust from the overhead lights. No wound. No panic. No cruelty. Just physics, timing, and the terrible embarrassment of a monster realizing the floor had won an argument. Caleb dropped one knee beside its shoulder, not pressing hard, only controlling space. His breathing remained steady. The Varric twisted once, felt the position, and stopped. That was the second impossible thing. Predators did not stop because prey asked nicely. Caleb leaned closer and said, "There you go. Same rule as back home. Big does not mean balanced." The Varric's I shifted toward him. The black pupil narrowed. For a heartbeat, I thought it would try again. Instead, it exhaled through its nose, long and irritated, like a champion forced to admit a small technical mistake. Caleb released it and stepped back before Rack could scream another order. The beast rose slowly, shook itself once, and faced him again. But now it stood differently. Lower. Wiser. Respectful. Behind the glass, no one laughed at Louisiana anymore. Karan Vex did not understand quiet defeat. His species had a dozen words for victory, 6 words for challenge, and no useful word for being corrected by someone holding gas station coffee. So when the Varric stepped back from Caleb Mercer instead of pressing the test, Karan's pride did something dangerous. It searched for a target smaller than the truth. That was equipment failure, he shouted, though nobody had asked for his analysis. The field confused the animal. The human did not control anything. Instructor Rack turned sharply. Cadet Vex, stand down. Karan ignored him. His eyes stayed locked on Caleb, who had just picked up his coffee cup and was checking whether dust had gotten into it. That tiny gesture finished what the Varric had started. Karan vaulted over the side barrier before the instructor could seal the walkway, landing inside the observation pit with enough force to make the pressure sensors flash yellow. The class gasped. Caleb looked up slowly. The Varric looked up faster. That was the part Karan missed. In his mind, the pit contained one embarrassed human and one controlled animal. In reality, it contained one human who had stopped treating him as a problem and one apex predator that had begun treating the human as familiar territory. "You think balance tricks make you strong?" Karan said, spreading all 4 arms. "Face someone trained." Caleb set his coffee down again, this time with a sadness that felt almost personal. "I was really trying to finish that." Karan rushed him. Not wildly. I will give him that much. He was Academy champion for a reason. His first movement was a layered pressure advance, 2 arms high to trap Caleb's shoulders, too low to take his hips, a textbook Kalthari control entry designed to fold an opponent into the mat without lasting injury. Against most species, it worked before they knew the lesson had begun. Caleb was not most species. He stepped inside the reach instead of away from it, which made absolutely no sense until Karan's arms closed on empty space behind him. Caleb's shoulder touched Karan's chest plate. His foot hooked behind Karan's lead ankle. His hand pressed under one elbow, not hard, just exact. Karan's entire attack tilted sideways like a chair missing one leg. He recovered fast, twisting, with impressive athleticism, but Caleb was already gone, circling to the outside with a calm little pivot that looked less like combat and more like someone avoiding a puddle on a sidewalk. Karan snarled and swung again, faster this time. Caleb ducked under the upper arms, guided one lower wrist past his ribs, and tapped Karan behind the knee. The champion dropped to one knee. Not injured. Worse. Corrected. The gallery made a sound I had never heard from cadets before, a collective inhale with no confidence behind it. Karan rose with his crest flared wide, humiliation burning hotter than discipline. He lunged one final time, using his full weight. Caleb sighed, turned with him, and let the momentum carry Karan across the yellow center mark. One clean hip shift, one controlled pull, one soft redirection, and the strongest cadet in our class slid onto the mat seated, blinking at nothing, his 4 hands gripping air that had betrayed him. The pressure sensors flashed blue. Match position resolved. Caleb stood over him, breathing normally. "You are strong," he said. "You just announce everything before you do it." Karan opened his mouth, but the Varric moved between them before he could speak. It did not growl at Caleb. It lowered its head toward Karan, slow and unmistakable, as if warning the larger alien that the next mistake would be socially expensive. Instructor Rack froze at the console. The Academy champion sat silent. Caleb picked up his coffee, looked through the glass at the rest of us, and gave a small apologetic shrug. That was when I realized the human had not entered the pit to prove he was stronger than a predator. He had entered because he already knew how predators think, and Karan had just proven he was easier to read than the animal. Instructor Rack shut down the pit barriers with hands that no longer looked steady. The transparent shields brightened, the emergency walkway extended, and a medical drone floated in only to realize nobody needed saving, which seemed to offend its programming. Karan Vex remained seated on the mat for several seconds, not hurt, not trapped, just publicly defeated in the one language his pride understood. Caleb Mercer stood nearby with his coffee cup in one hand and his other hand open at his side, making no victory gesture, offering no insult, giving the room nothing dramatic to hold on to except the impossible facts. The Varric, the creature our academy treated like a living disaster warning, had placed itself between Caleb and the largest cadet in the class. Not because it was controlled by a command collar, not because the field had confused it, because in some deep predator language older than translation, it had decided Caleb belonged on the side of things that should not be challenged carelessly. Instructor Rack spoke into the pit, and his voice had lost the polished authority it carried 18 minutes earlier. "Cadet Mercer, step away from the specimen." Caleb glanced at the Varric. The animal did not move. "Sure," he said. Then he took 2 slow steps back. Only then did the Varric lower itself to the mat, front legs folding beneath its body, head dipping until it was below Caleb's hand. Every cadet in the gallery understood that posture. We had studied it in survival theory. We had watched recordings of lesser predators showing it to dominant pack leaders, territorial giants, and creatures too dangerous to test twice. We had never seen a Varric do it. Rack whispered something too low for the speaker to catch. The Academy system caught it anyway and printed a helpful translation across the console. Submission behavior confirmed. That was when the room changed. Not loudly. Fear rarely arrives with music. It arrives as small corrections. Cadets who had been standing close to the glass stepped back. The ones who had laughed at Caleb's jacket stopped looking at it. Karan stood slowly, but he did not look at the Varric this time. He looked at Caleb the way a pilot looks at a clear sky after lightning hits the ground beside him. Caleb seemed uncomfortable with all of it. He scratched the back of his neck, checked the cup again, and said, "For what it is worth, he is pretty calm once nobody is acting weird." Nobody answered. What could we say to that? Our most feared training predator had just been described like a neighbor's oversized dog at a cookout. Instructor Rack opened the outer gate, and Caleb walked out of the pit without hurry. As he passed Karan, he paused just long enough to say, "You should work on your feet. You lean before you move." It was not cruel. That somehow made it heavier. Karan lowered his gaze. The rest of us did the same without being told. Later, the official report would call it an unscheduled behavioral anomaly during first contact with a human trainee. That was the Academy way. Clean words. Safe words. Words that made administrators feel as if reality had signed the proper forms. But those of us in Survival Hall 7 knew better. We had watched the galaxy's definition of apex predator bend around a man from Earth who thought warning signs were suggestions, monsters were familiar, and fear was just bad footwork. We had believed humans survived because they were clever. We were wrong. They were clever because they had to survive. Earth had not made them kings of every food chain. It had made them something more unsettling. Creatures that could stand before the top of another world's chain and recognize an old problem with new teeth. That day, I learned the truth hidden inside every human smile. They are not fragile. They are not prey. They are what happens when a planet spends millions of years trying to build a monster, and the monster learns manners.